Hi, it's Benjamin Douglas Ray with another edition of Sustainable Cannabis TV. Today I'm here with Othas Smith III. He's the founder and CEO of Tetragram. How you doing?
Doing well. How about yourself, Ben?
I'm doing really well today, and this is a backdrop of Denver, but it does look like this today. Nice, bright, shiny day. Where are you today?
I'm right outside of Washington, D.C. in Bowie, Maryland. So not as blue skies as you, but it's warm for once, given this time of year.
Well, even though it snows a lot, we still get 330 days worth of sunshine, so not a bad place.
Yeah, no doubt.
So I'd like you to tell the viewers and listeners a bit about your background, where you're from, what you're doing growing up, and then how you got into the industry. And then let's talk about your company.
Sure. So I'm a Maryland native, born on, pretty much a farm, rural area, about 4.5 acres. My neighbors had horses, cows, and all that good stuff. So I still reside in Maryland, right outside of Washington, D.C. And I got into the cannabis industry, unfortunately, through a really tragic car accident that I had in 2003, where unfortunately I fell asleep at the wheel, driving 5 minutes from home like it typically happens, and was ejected close to 100 feet, man.
Wow.
Yeah, so it was landed on my head and was really pronounced dead on the scene. But luckily, my parents always said I had a hard head, so I was able to survive. Fast forward, I get out of the hospital and I'm prescribed opioids to manage all the pain that I've suffered through these traumatic injuries. And so, prior to the accident, I never was one that used pills or any type of medication. So it was really foreign to me. So once I started taking pills daily, and then after 2.5, 3 years, I was just like, enough's enough. I got to find another way in order to address my medical condition.
How old were you when that happened?
I was 24.
Okay. And then you were on the opioids for 2 or 3 years.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, you hear about it now, how dangerous opioids can be. So I said, this is no way how I want to live my life. And so cannabis has been something I'd, used throughout college and high school. So I said, forget the pills and let's go back to using plant medicine,
Right. Was it something that you had read about, or you just thought, I'm going to try this because I'm sick and tired of these opioids, how they make me feel, side effects, that you try something else? Or had you heard that cannabis was a substitute for opioids?
No, it was just something that I'd always, had used for relaxation. So I said, I'm going to just give it a shot to move forward to see how it addresses my pain.
Mm-hmm.
And, luckily enough, it worked out really well. So, as time transpired and then things started to take effect across the country where it was becoming legal in medical states and so forth, I jumped at the opportunity to get my card here in Maryland once they opened up in 2014.
Uh-huh.
And so once Maryland opened up their medical program, I got my card, and I'll never forget the first time I entered a dispensary because, I was a little egotistical. I was like, I know everything there is to know about.
Right.
But once I got into the dispensary and they were talking about cannabinoids and terpenes, I was like, whoa, what is all this? And just the selection. So that's when, I really found out there's just a lot more to cannabis than I ever dreamed of,
When you think about it, like I'll specifically talk about, people my parents' age who have never been, into a dispensary. It's super intimidating. And so if you think about, back to those days when you first walked in, not the egotistical part, but when you went in and you were like, wow, there's so much more to this than I ever imagined. It is a little bit overwhelming. And then the more you start to learn about it, you're like, this is so much more than just, a joint in high school or, whatever that is. It's such a sophisticated, not only science, but there's so much to it. It's almost like, fine wines in many ways that people have no idea about.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, that's when I started just talking to the dispensary staff, other patients, medical professionals, and just realizing that, I wasn't alone. Like a majority of people are just at a loss when it comes to, this new age of cannabis that we live in. And then more importantly, trying to figure out which product is going to work best to, meet your medical need.
Right.
It seemed like every dispensary I talk to, I walk into, everyone would say, you got to keep a journal, you got to write it down, because there's just so many products, there's no way you're going to be able to keep track of them all.
Yeah, and depending on the dispensary, they may be vertically integrated, so they may have their own products. They may just be kind of like, the Walmart of cannabis and have a lot of different ones. They may have ones that are pushed by certain bud tenders. So yeah, it's very difficult to know, what to do unless you keep track for yourself. Just like being your own kind of doctor or, medical advocate, that's the only way to really know what's going to work for you.
Yeah, exactly. And so when I saw that dispensaries were like selling paperback journals to patients as a way to keep track of their products, I was like, no one's going to do that. I was like, everything we do is on our phone. So, that's what really gave me the halo effect and said, I can create something that is digital and put it on people's phones so they can more actively use it and be easily, to keep track of this information.
So was that kind of an epiphany you had? You got a like piece of paper, you got a phone, you're looking for pencil, and you're like, wait a minute, the world's becoming digital. Let me do something about this.
Yeah, pretty much. I started writing it down initially, and then I was talking to other patients, and they would use some of them had like crazy Excel spreadsheets, and I was like, this is way too much. Like,
yeah,
build an application where this can make it a lot simpler for people.
So tell us about the application then. How does it work?
So Tetragram, with this first version that we released, myself with my two business partners, it addresses the immediate need, which is provides medical patients or even recreational users with the ability to keep track of the products they purchase, but more importantly, like the terpenes and cannabinoids associated with the product, where they made the purchase, how they consume the product, and then they can associate that product with a medical condition if they wish, and then rate the effectiveness of that product. And then, at the end of the day, they can share that review with other people on the platform, or they can keep it exclusive to themselves. So it's like your own little personal digital diary, if you will, on the fly.
So earlier I was mentioning kind of my mom or anybody who hasn't been into a dispensary before, and you had just mentioned cannabinoids and terpenes. And I think if I mentioned that to a lot of people, they'd have no idea what I'm talking about, let alone the difference. So if you could kind of go into the two and the difference between the two, that'd be great.
Yeah, so like your cannabinoids, for one, are, people know the most familiar ones, such as THC, which is the psychoactive ingredient in cannabis that people love. And then you have CBD, which has really gained a lot of momentum in the last couple of years. But they're just different cannabinoids at the end of the day that attach to your CB1 and CB2 receptors throughout your body. And then you also have terpenes, which is, I think, the most fun part about cannabis, because that's what provides cannabis with this unique smell, flavor, and then it also is going to provide a huge impact in determining how that product is going to make you feel at the end of the day.
So it isn't necessarily the strain necessarily, but the terpenes would be what give it a specific and distinct flavor.
Exactly right, Ben. And so that's what we really try to drive home with Tetragram is, because the industry as a whole is really starting to pay attention more to the terpenes and cannabinoids, because that's the underlying value of how that product is going to make you feel. The product name or strain name has zero bearing on what that product is going to ultimately do. So it's really been refreshing to see people pay closer attention to these cannabinoids and terpenes.
So here's a question for you. So let's say there are, I think there's something like 120 or so cannabinoids, and however many terpenes. You can tell me how many different, types there are. When you mix those two together and do a matrix, how many possible, choices would people have for different effects and or different, I guess, odors or tastes or whatever it is? It seems infinite, possibly.
Yeah, it really is. And so when we were thinking about listing, and as you mentioned, there are hundreds of different terpenes and cannabinoids, but when we started building out Tetragram, we were like, we're not going to include every single one. So we really looked at what were the major terpenes and cannabinoids that the testing facilities test for. And so we just made sure that our data set was in line with what is currently being tested and just move forward with that. Now, as new terpenes and cannabinoids gain adoptiveness and, attention, we'll start to include those in the future.
So as you said, people know about, CBD, there's CBG, CBN, a few. What are some emerging ones that are coming out, some cannabinoids that are kind of on the brink, and what would those be used for?
So the biggest one that I'm really starting to hear a lot about is CBN. I'm starting to see that a lot in the dispensaries here, where it's like a CBN isolate. And that one has been shown to work very effectively as a sleep aid. Really helps, or anxiety. It really helps calm people down and can assist in putting them to sleep. So I'm really to see a lot of traction there, but I think we're still only scratching the surface of, the medicinal value in these different chemical compositions of cannabis.
And that isolate, so would you see that in different intake methods? Does it affect you differently if it was, vaped or put into a gummy, or what are you seeing as going to be, what works for people?
Yeah, so it's across the board when it comes to the consumption methods. So I've seen CBN in patches that you just apply to the skin. I've seen it where it can be vaped. And it's very important to make that distinction, right? Because if you, vape any product as opposed to using a bong and so forth, that onset is going to be different. Like a bong is definitely going to get you there a lot quicker. And so that's a really important component to understand, that consumers really need to keep track of how they're consuming the product so that they can understand if that's the right way for them to move forward.
Got it. So I've got a comment here from Nisha. Check out Kira's Midnight Blueberry Camino gummies with CBN. I'll have to check that out to see what that's like. And I imagine that there are a lot more that are coming on the line CBN. I don't know that much about it myself. I mean, we have a line of CBD products, the 8 Saints brand, but I don't know that much about CBN. So thanks, Nisha, for that.
Yeah, I'll have to check into that. It's just frustrating how certain products are available in one market and not available in the other. But this is the times we're living in right now.
Yeah, that's right. So Nisha adds that too. It must be for the folks in California. She's in California. She was on the show a couple of weeks ago. So to complicate it even more, what about THC levels, and how do those then, mix with the different terpenes, and do consumers even care about THC levels, or what do you see around there with your software?
So it really does vary state to state. Like one thing that Maryland did very well here is that they made sure in the legislation that all products have the terpenes and cannabinoids on it. And so what that does, it really sparks the consumer's brain to think outside of just the THC number, because that's the only thing they're presented with. So in this state, I can speak to, like, it's really refreshing to see a lot of people not paying attention to THC because they have all this other information, and the dispensaries are doing a great job of making people aware of the benefits of knowing that information. But it's across the board. It's it's a mixed bag. Like if you look at, like I was in Massachusetts a couple of weeks ago, and they only list the THC and some cannabinoids. And it just varies from cultivator to cultivator. So, the learning curve can be bigger and greater in certain states if they don't have that access to that information or are not educated on it. But in states that actually promote the cannabinoids and terpenes on their product, you're starting to see a lot more of that population pay attention to those as opposed to THC. Because, like I always say, regardless if it's 10% or 30% THC, you're always going to get that psychoactive side effect anyway. So
and is your software customized at all to different states, or is it just a platform to record what people find?
Simply, in this first version, is just a platform to record what people find. But it has been really refreshing to see, because we have a community side of Tetragram where people can share their reviews anonymously. And we can see different products that people are consuming across the country. And it's like, man, I wish I had that one here. But it's just not available, given the way things are with regulation and interstate commerce.
Well, once it becomes, federally legal and the barriers are gone, if that ever happens, I imagine there's going to be huge growth in your software for sure, based on all the differences,
Yeah, I mean, because with the data that we're capturing, it's really, designed to help the industry as a whole. So, not only just the consumer becoming more knowledgeable by being able to catalog their experience and resort to it, But with the anonymous data that we're collecting, it's just going to really help the industry. And so when federal legalization does happen, we will be a company that, even NIH, for example, will probably turn to, because we'll have so much aggregate data on the effects of these various products.
I imagine it's important for brands too. So for example, if you had, if you had that brand that Nisha was talking about in California and it starts to spread to Colorado, then and someone became a multi-state operator, you would know in Maryland, if they opened there, that would be popular, coming from one of the coasts. So you might say, this is something that we're learning from, and we can help provide more options to consumers with what they're already getting in some other areas to help the brands grow.
Yeah, I mean, with Tetragram, a lot of people are referred to it as like the Yelp of cannabis, and as it grows, and that's really spot on, I'd say, because we really want to establish a ranking system, because there really isn't one in this industry. And so, you can have 5,000 people growing Blue Dream, but not every 5,000 variation of that group Blue Dream is necessarily going to be beneficial for a medical condition, or just for recreational enjoyment. So, we are getting a lot of interest from cultivators, especially because, when they sell a product, if it sells very well, they're excited about it, but they don't know why. So we can really bridge that gap with data to say, X, Y, and Z cultivator, your X, Y, and Z strain is selling very well because we have 3,000 people on Tetragram that have used it for, X, Y, and Z medical condition. I mean, that's a really impactful statement to be able to draw based upon data.
Well, I suppose eventually you can drill down even more to go batch by batch, because that even varies within Blue Dream or the same cultivator, over years.
Yeah, I mean, you're really inside my brain right now, Ben, because that's something we're working on, because there's no standardization across the country when it relates to consumers having that batch information, the COA, if you will, the certificate of analysis. And so that's something that we're really driving for, because it's nice to have the terpenes and cannabinoid information, but if that information could be readily available, we can import that in the Tetragram ahead of time. That makes the experiences even better on the platform too.
That's right. Yeah, I know there's a craft beer app that's been around 3 or 4 years, and that's grown over time. And my older kids use that, and I've learned a lot just from going on there. If I go to a local brewery, or I ask them, they point me to a review, and you get some great information, if you like it, relating if it's an IPA, if it's hazy, where it's from, all this stuff. And I imagine that does help everybody on all sides to learn more about it.
Yeah, and it's funny you mentioned that too, because I actually had that beer app at that time when craft beer was just exploding. And I mean, you're in Colorado, so you know very well. I mean, that was pretty much a mecca for craft breweries. So,
right.
It was like, how are you going to keep track of all these beers you tried? So I will admit, I probably, took a little bit of that recipe when I built Tetragram for sure.
Well, yeah, I mean, you think about it too, we can learn a lot from the craft industry. We're 4 or 5 years behind here in Colorado. We followed the exact same path that craft breweries did. And in fact, the same people who wrote, the regulations for the craft beer industry were the same ones that worked with the administration to write the regulations for the cannabis industry 4 or 5 years later. In fact, there's a lot of the similar language in there, different industries, different histories, but there's a lot we can learn from it. So, if you want to follow a path, just go to an industry that's niche like that, follow it, and you can see the trends continuing down the same path as they have now since we went rec here, specifically with rec, not as much for medical, but with rec. And now they're starting to come together with beverages and other things. But for a long, long time, they were paralleling, 5 years lagging.
I totally agree. I mean, there's a lot of similarities between this, the alcohol industry and the cannabis industry in general. So,
right.
100% correct.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about your software then. And, we've talked about kind of how it works, but I want to know how it can revolutionize and really empower the cannabis industry to move forward.
So again, with the data that we're collecting, if we look at the different segments of the industry, so you have the consumer, you have the dispensary, cultivator, and a medical professional. And so from the consumer's perspective, again, it's just giving them the ability to keep this information on their phone, resort to it, and draw conclusions at the end of the day over a period of time about what's working for them. So the consumer becomes smarter about their cannabis purchases, and they make better purchase decisions. This data can also be utilized to empower the dispensaries because, one of the first things I did when I left corporate America and jumped into this industry was get a job as a bud tender because I really wanted to understand from a very personal perspective how the consumer feels when they enter the store and behind the scenes from the dispensary side. And I'll tell you, it's extremely challenging for a bud tender to make a product recommendation when, as we mentioned, cannabis affects everyone differently.
Right.
And so by having data at the bud tender's fingertips, which says, these terpenes or these cannabinoids or these particular products, even more within your state, are seen to have been this effective in addressing this medical condition, it makes that bud tender make a more confident recommendation. Just because they have such a level of feedback that they feel confident to make that recommendation on. And so that, drives home to, the customer feels like they have a clear understanding of what the bud tender is telling them, and it strengthens that loyalty between both. If we look at it from a cultivator's perspective, again, it drives that conclusion of how effective is their product in addressing a medical condition or for recreational enjoyment. And then we also offer a white label of Tetragram for research purposes. So, we do have MSOs that, prior to, like, again, as the consumer is becoming smarter, the MSOs are starting to take notice. They're like, okay, we can't just make cannabis products because we know they're going to probably sell. We need to really do some data and some product research to see how effective this product can be and then drive that mission home. And then, of course, medical professionals, given that it's federally illegal, they have no evidence, clinical evidence really to rely on to feel confident to, become certified to recommend cannabis and just, help their patients along that process of self-discovery. So this data at the end of the day is just so impactful to the industry. I hope you can see, and it's going to really make an impact.
It is about education. That's one thing we've talked a lot about on the show, is that the more we educate and more that we use, your platform, my platform, everybody in the industry to talk about, the nuances and the benefits, and that education of legislators, people who don't know anything about cannabis, the better it's going to be for all of us, And I think the days of people going into a dispensary and saying to a bud tender, what's good? And they say, well, I like it. Those days are gone, I mean, that's how I used to be. What do you think? I think it's good stuff, like it has to be so much more than that because different people have different tolerances, like you say, different pains. Even if I would say, I need something for wrist pain, it may be something completely different than, my brother next to me who has wrist pain and might be older or younger. It varies person to person. So the more that we can understand how it affects us and the more we can track that, the better off it's going to be for the industry as a whole.
Yeah, I totally agree. Everybody has a different endocannabinoid system. So these CBD, these cannabinoids and terpenes are just going to interact with everyone differently, regardless if you're the same build and size and everything. It's just really depends on the individual.
That's right. So how long has the company been going?
So the product Tetragram has been out in the market since July 10th of 2020.
Okay.
And so, it was kind of funny when we spent 3 years building Tetragram, and then right when we were ready to release it, COVID hit. So we were like, what do we do? But, come to find out, it was a great time to release Tetragram because a lot of people during the COVID and continue to pay a lot more attention to their mental and physical health.
Right.
And, there's a lot of all that outside noise was really ceased because you really couldn't do much. Where cannabis consumption went up during COVID too. So since July 10th, we're in about 70 dispensaries throughout the country nationwide. So it's really been taking off, and to see that all be organic is really awesome.
Well, 70 dispensaries.
Yeah, it's really spreading pretty fast. It's like wildfire.
Wow, that's great. That's incredible. And I know it's only just the beginning based on what we're talking about. And if it follows craft beer, as we were talking about, if it follows the trends of how many people are, cannabis users, now, as that's maybe 15% in the country, everything's going to grow along with that, and your software is going to grow too.
Yeah, I mean, more states are coming online each year, so that's only going to further drive the adoption of Tetragram. So, the runway looks really nice for us in the industry as a whole.
That's great. Well, to wrap it up here, can you tell the viewers and listeners how to get a hold of you for more questions, how to get to the app? Also want to know, is it free? Does it cost? Just give some background about that if people want to know more for you.
Sure. Yeah, so Tetragram is completely free for the consumer. It can be easily downloaded from the App Store or Google Play, so both iPhone and Android devices. Please follow us on social at the Tetragram app. That's Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. And that's probably the best way to reach me as well. So I encourage everyone to download it and take control of their cannabis journey.
That sounds good. Well, last question here. What are you looking forward to over the next 12 months?
Version 2 of Tetragram. So that's what we're currently in build mode right now. So we have a lot of cool new features and functionality that we'll be bringing not only to consumers, but for dispensaries, product manufacturers, and the medical community. So we got our heads down and we're back building again.
That sounds great. I'm looking forward to it. I'm going to download it now and check it out. And I look forward to your growth. And it was great talking to you.
Likewise, Ben. Always a pleasure.
All right. Talk to you soon.
Take care.